The reservoirs that supply water to Corpus Christi, Texas, are at 7.7%. That is the lowest level ever recorded since they were built. And Corpus Christi is not some small desert town running low on well water. It is the #1 crude oil export port in the United States, in charge of 60% of every barrel of American crude that leaves this country. 500,000 people live there. $1 billion in refineries depend on that water, and it is going away. The same factory growth that turned Corpus Christi into America's energy gateway is now the thing draining it dry. That detail is going to matter a lot as this story unfolds. Choke Canyon Reservoir sits about 80 miles southwest of the city, in the rolling brush country of Live Oak County. It was finished in 1982 by the Bureau of Reclamation, built to hold 662,820 acre-feet of water at full pool. As of this week, it holds roughly 50,800. Its water surface is sitting more than 41 feet below where it should be. You could walk across stretches of the lakebed that have not been open to the air since the dam was built. Lake Corpus Christi, the smaller of the two reservoirs, sits upstream on the Nueces River and was created in 1958 behind Wesley Seal Dam. It was built to hold 256,000 acre-feet. It is right now holding about 22,800, with its surface sitting nearly 19 feet below normal pool level. In early March, it dropped below 10% for the first time in its 68-year history. To put those numbers in view, during the harsh Texas drought that ran from 2011 to 2015, when more than 90% of the state was under extreme drought listing, these same reservoirs bottomed out at 30.1%. That was seen as awful at the time. The current crisis has blown past that record by a gap that nobody in the region's water planning history saw coming. The former chief of operations at Corpus Christi Water, Drew Molly, looked at last year's inflow numbers and decided that this drought may actually be worse than the official drought of record. The Nueces River simply is not sending water into the system at the rates it used to, and the drop has not slowed down. A year ago, the combined system was sitting around 15%. 6 months ago, near 12%. By January of this year, the city crossed 10% for the first time ever and put out a formal notice. By March, single digits. 7.7% at Choke Canyon, 8.9% at Lake Corpus Christi. The direction of the line on every tracking chart in the region points one way. The region has not had real rainfall since July of 2025. Nueces County recorded its 6th driest start to a year in 132 years of weather records through January and February of 2026. And the heat is making the problem worse in ways that are hard to overstate. The top 5 warmest years in South Texas history have all landed since 2010, with 2024 coming in as the hottest on record. Shallow, sun-baked reservoirs in the South Texas brush country lose huge amounts of water to the air every single day, and the hotter it gets, the faster the reservoirs shrink even without anyone drawing from them. The water is leaving from the top and barely being replaced from the bottom. Weather experts are not offering relief. No real rainfall is expected through September. The La Niña pattern that ruled much of the past 2 years has given way to neutral conditions. And neutral conditions in South Texas tend to mean dry weather through the summer and into fall. The reservoirs are not just low, they are on a path that, without help, reaches zero. What comes next is the part that still does not make sense to a lot of people watching from outside Texas. There is a third reservoir in the system. Lake Texana sits about 100 miles to the northeast, linked to Corpus Christi by the Mary Roads pipeline, 141 miles of buried steel that was built to serve as a backup supply line. For most of the last 2 decades, it was used lightly, maybe adding 20 or 30% to the city's needs during dry spells. Today, Lake Texana is giving roughly 70% of every drop of water that comes out of a tap in Corpus Christi. The pipeline is running near its top speed of 72 million gallons per day. And Lake Texana itself has dropped from about 90% to 55% in just 6 months. It was never built to carry an entire metro area's demand on its own, and the math on its drop is closing fast. At current draw rates, it will hit 30% by summer. That is the point where the La Vaca Navidad River Authority, which runs the reservoir for downstream farming and city users, starts cutting off access to protect those other customers. The Mary Roads pipeline itself is a feat of building. 141 miles of large steel pipe that crosses 3 counties of South Texas ranch land, moving raw water from Jackson County to the treatment plants in Nueces County. When it was built, it was meant as an extra source, a backup for dry years, an added layer of safety. Nobody planned for it to be the main lifeline keeping 500,000 people and a factory zone alive at the same time. The pumps are running full out. The pipe is doing what it was made to do. The problem is that what it was made to do was never meant to be enough on its own, so the two main reservoirs are nearly empty. The backup is draining at a rate that puts it in crisis range within months, and 500,000 people, along with one of the most important factory zones in the western half of the world, depend fully on what is left. This is where the size of this crisis grows well beyond water and into the base of the American energy system. The port of Corpus Christi is the largest crude oil export port in the United States and the third largest in the world. It handles roughly 60% of all American crude oil that ships overseas, moving about 2.2 million barrels per day through the deepwater shipping channel along the Texas Gulf Coast. In 2025 alone, the port moved 203 million tons of cargo. The Texas Comptroller figured the port's money impact at $113 billion, backing over 860,000 jobs directly and in linked roles across the state. Those are not vague figures. They stand for the real buildings and systems that link the Permian Basin oil fields to world energy markets. Lined up along the Corpus Christi ship channel and the nearby factory zone are refineries run by Flint Hills Resources, Valero Energy, and Citgo Petroleum, with a combined refining ability near 1 million barrels per day. Together, they make roughly 450,000 barrels of gasoline every day. Flint Hills sends jet fuel through a direct pipeline running north to airports in Dallas and Austin. Cheniere Energy runs a huge liquefied natural gas terminal with 15 million tons of yearly exportability, with growth plans pushing past 30 million. Major crude pipelines from the Permian Basin, including Gray Oak, Cactus II, and Epic Crude, meet at the Enbridge Ingleside Energy Center, the single largest crude export terminal in the Americas, with 17.6 million barrels of storage room and the ability to load 2 supertankers at the same time. Every single one of these places needs water. Refineries need it for cooling towers, steam systems, crude cleaning, and fire safety. A plant running at full speed cannot simply cut its water use by 25% and keep working normally. That is not how the design works. The systems are not built to have their water supply squeezed bit by bit. Changing water flows in a refinery is not like turning down the faucet in your bathroom. It means taking whole processing units offline, slowing work across linked systems, and cutting output. In the worst case, it means shutting down fully. No refineries have closed yet, but the steps being taken across the factory zone tell you how seriously the energy world is treating this. Flint Hills Resources is building a used wastewater system to cover about 15% of its needs. Valero signed a 30-year deal for up to 8 million gallons of recycled water per day. The ExxonMobil and SABIC joint venture plant, Gulf Coast Growth Ventures, cut its daily use from 20 million gallons down to 12.5 million through in-house recycling. Even with those steps, the region has already lost business. Companies have walked away from planned growth. Industry leaders in the coastal bend guess the city has lost up to $20 billion in new money because possible partners looked at the water numbers and decided the risk was not worth it. The ripple effects of a slowdown would not stay local. With Corpus Christi handling 60% of U.S. crude exports, any break in the chain moves through world oil markets almost right away. The Brent crude benchmark, which now includes West Texas Intermediate Midland-grade crude shipped through this port, would show the hit. Domestic gasoline prices, already high in 2026, would spike further. Jet fuel sent by Flint Hills to Dallas and Austin airports would face shortages. LNG deals serving European and Asian buyers would go unfilled. The math on this is not guesswork. It is plain counting. And the counting says that what is happening in the reservoirs of South Texas has the power to change fuel prices in Frankfurt and Tokyo. So yeah, not great. And the timing of what happened next was almost too perfect. If you're finding this useful, subscribe. We cover water crises, drought events, and geography. News like this every week with the full picture you need to actually follow what is going on. By 2015, Corpus Christi had a chance to stop everything you just heard. Heavy rains that year, and again in 2018, partly refilled the reservoirs, buying the city good time. Instead of using that window to lock in a long-term drought-proof water source, city leaders turned their focus to bringing in industry. The oil and chemical boom came with stunning speed. The Gulf Coast Growth Ventures plant opened in January of 2022 as one of the largest ethane crackers in North America. Its water permit allows up to 25 million gallons per day, and it used close to 5 billion gallons in 2024 alone. A Steel Dynamics rolling mill in San Patricio County pulls roughly 6 million gallons daily. In total, just 12 companies now use about 55% of all the water Corpus Christi sends out. Factory users account for somewhere between 50 and 60% of total demand across the system. And the supply side math is brutal. Over the past 15 years, the region has used an average of 153% of the water flowing into the western reservoirs. The system has been running a gap between supply and demand for over 10 years, hidden by reserves that built up during wetter times. The water was being spent faster than nature was putting it back, and nobody stopped the clock. The city did have one major plan that could have changed the path: a proposed seawater desalination plant at the inner harbor of the Corpus Christi ship channel, which would have been the largest in Texas and one of the biggest in the Americas, able to make 30 million gallons of drought-proof water every day. The project was first proposed in 2017 and picked up speed through 2019 and 2020. As engineers drew up plans and the Texas Water Development Board set aside hundreds of millions in low-interest loans. For years, it looked like the project would happen. It was the single largest safety net against exactly the kind of drought the city is now living through. Then, the cost guesses started climbing. The first figure of $220 million rose through one review after another. Supply chain problems, rising prices, and design changes pushed it higher. By July of 2025, the number had reached $1.2 billion. In September of 2025, after 13 hours of public testimony at a packed city council chamber with residents and industry speakers lined up on both sides, the council voted 6-3 to kill it. The thinking was cost. The result was that Corpus Christi entered the worst drought in its recorded history, with no long-term answer in place and no real way to build one fast enough. If the council had approved that plant when it was first proposed, the city would have drought-proof water flowing right now. They did not. Governor Greg Abbott later blamed the city for wasting years of planning time. City leaders pushed back, saying the state water loans had never actually been sent out and that the blame was being spread unfairly. The fight goes on in cable news studios and meeting rooms across the Texas Capitol. The reservoirs do not care who wins it. Now look at what this crisis looks like from inside the neighborhoods where 500,000 people actually live. Under Stage 3 drought rules, all lawn watering and automatic sprinkler systems are banned citywide. Cars can only be washed with a 5-gallon bucket and only on set days. Swimming pools must be covered when not in use. High schools have canceled car wash fundraisers. Splash pads that children use during the brutal South Texas summers face possible closure. Breaking the rules carries possible Class C crime charges, meaning residents who water their lawns could end up in front of a judge. And the limits fall almost fully on home users, while factory use goes on with fairly small changes. You do not need a degree in politics to understand why that feels unfair to the people living under those rules. In Hillcrest, one of the city's oldest historically black neighborhoods, a woman named Mana Lytle has watched her grass die from her front porch. She is 70 years old and has lived in this neighborhood her entire life, in a home wedged between refinery sites that have run in the area for decades. The way she sees it, the city handed the water to industry first and treated the people who live there as an afterthought. Her dishes sit in the sink longer now. Every gallon is counted in ways it never was before. A few miles south, Tamala Alejandro let her beloved peach tree die. She had spent years growing a vegetable garden of watermelons, cantaloupes, and potatoes in her backyard. All of it is gone. She has lived in Corpus Christi for 15 years and cannot understand why the residents are making all the cuts when the 12 companies pulling most of the water face barely any limits at all. Tiago Campos owns a business called Mr. Fancy Pants Car Wash and runs 2 spots in the city. He is looking into whether well water can keep his shops alive because city water may not be there much longer at the amounts he needs. His workers are asking questions about their jobs that he does not have answers to. Corey Haywood stopped giving his 4-year-old and 2-year-old granddaughters bubble baths. That is not a policy paper or a building report. That is what a water crisis actually looks like when it walks through the front door of somebody's house. Factories right now pay an extra fee of 31 cents per 1,000 gallons into a fund set aside for new water work. That brings in about $6 million a year. A professor at Texas A&M University Corpus Christi, named Isabel Ariza, put words to what runs through every neighborhood in the city right now. The city promised water to all these factory users without ever actually having the water to back up those promises. And now the people who live here are paying for it. And this is where the 5 scenarios land. On March 17th of 2026, the temporary head of water operations for Corpus Christi, Nick Winkleman, stood in front of the city council during a marathon 10-hour meeting and laid out 5 forecasts for the city's water future. The worst 2, called Scenario A and Scenario B, showed a Level 1 water emergency by May of this year. The middle cases pushed the timeline to October. Only the most hopeful scenario, needing every emergency project to work at the same time and some rainfall, dodged emergency fully. A Level 1 water emergency would force a required 25% cut in all water use, home, business, and factory. No city in the United States has ever put forced factory water cuts of that size on a refinery complex. Refineries and chemical plants are not built to handle that kind of drop safely. A former Assistant Secretary of Energy with 3 decades of time in the chemical industry described the spot as a rather awkward dance between running safely and forced saving. On March 20th, 2 things bought time. Governor Abbott told the La Vaca Navidad River Authority to lower the cutoff point for Lake Texana from 50% to 40%, letting the Mary Roads pipeline keep running at roughly 40 million gallons per day instead of being shut off. State officials also fast-tracked emergency permits for 4 new groundwater wells along the Nueces River, which started pumping 4.5 million gallons per day almost right away. Added to existing wells already making 4.2 million gallons, those steps pushed the emergency call back to at least July of 2026. But the governor's patience has limits. His chief of staff sent a blunt message to state water officials saying disaster is on the doorstep. Abbott himself warned publicly that if the city cannot handle the crisis, the state will step in and take over water operations. That has never happened in Texas history. The city now has roughly $1 billion in water building projects at different stages across the South Texas coastline, aiming for 76 million gallons per day of new supply. A $175 million brackish water desalination plant at the O.N. Stevens Water Treatment Plant was approved in February and could send its first water within 11 months, starting at about 4 million gallons per day and growing to 21 million by year 2. The Evangeline Groundwater Project in San Patricio County aims for 24 million gallons per day by 2028. But legal fights from the nearby town of Sinton could push that back 2 full years. A private desalination company has offered to sell about 9 million gallons per day within a year of a signed deal. And the Inner Harbor desalination plant that the council killed in September is now being looked at again at an emergency session set for April 9th, with a new design priced at roughly $978 million. Every one of those projects takes time, months at best, years for the biggest ones. The brackish desalination plant is the fastest choice, and even that will not make real volume for nearly a year. The Evangeline wells face a lawsuit that could tie them up until 2030 if the courts side with Sinton. The Harbor Island project, run by the Nueces River Authority, is aiming for 50 million gallons per day, but would not be working until 2029 at the earliest. The city's total daily need across all users sits at roughly 100 million gallons. Even if every project comes online on time, the gap between what the city needs right now and what the building timeline can deliver is huge. And the water scientist Robert Mace at the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment at Texas State University has pointed out what nobody in City Hall wants to say out loud. If the drought goes on and the reservoirs get close to zero, leaders will have to think about shutting down industry fully to avoid having to move people out of the city. That sentence describes a scene with no match in modern American history. Moving 500,000 people out of a major city area, not because of a hurricane, not because of a wildfire, but because the water simply ran out. This is not Cape Town in 2018, where the crisis was mostly about homes and was finally broken by strong public water saving and winter rains. Cape Town set its day zero as the moment dams hit 13.5% full. The city set up tracking for each person's water use, daily limits of 50 liters per person, and public countdown clocks that kept the crisis in front of every resident every day. And it worked. Saving efforts brought use down sharply, and then the rains came. But Cape Town's demand was almost all from homes. People took shorter showers, stopped washing cars, and reused laundry water. That game plan does not work when 50 to 60% of your water demand comes from factory users running chemical steps and steam systems that cannot be turned down with a public ad campaign. A refinery cannot take shorter showers. And unlike Flint, Michigan or Jackson, Mississippi, where the crises were about tainted or broken water systems, Corpus Christi faces supply loss. The water is not dirty. It is not tainted. It is gone. The pipes work fine. The treatment plants are running. There is just nothing left to treat. A retired water district manager named Don Roach, with decades of work in the region, wrote a 2-page warning to officials laying out what the final stages of this crisis would look like. Controlled money collapse, mass job loss, full factory shutdown. And in the end, if no rain comes and no new water comes online fast enough, a need for trucked-in water that would bankrupt small businesses and low-income families across the coastal bend. Several other Texas towns are already under the same strain. Pflugerville declared its own water disaster north of Austin. The Edwards Aquifer that feeds San Antonio is being pulled down at rates that have water planners across central Texas watching Corpus Christi as a preview of what could spread. Across the Sun Belt, from Arizona to Georgia, a pattern is coming into view that stretches well beyond any single city. Decades of fast growth built on the belief that water would always be there, approved and piped and taken for granted, are now crashing into a climate that is no longer keeping that promise. And in almost every case, the cities that are hit first are the ones that tied their money future to the industries that drink the most water. As of this week, Corpus Christi's western reservoirs are still falling. Choke Canyon sits at 7.7%, and Lake Corpus Christi at 8.9%. Without real rainfall, which weather experts do not expect before September, Choke Canyon could be fully empty by February of 2027. Lake Corpus Christi could follow by May. Lake Texana, the last real lifeline linked by 141 miles of pipeline across the South Texas plain, is draining toward the danger zone by midsummer. 500,000 people. 60% of America's crude oil exports. $1 billion in emergency projects that need years the city may not have. And a forecast that offers nothing but heat and dry air through the fall. The city manager himself said it at a recent council meeting. The federal government knows the money is needed, and the state knows the money is needed. Nobody is writing checks yet. The gap between what exists today and what the city needs is counted in years. The water supply gap is counted in months, and the reservoirs keep falling.